All right, let's jump right into it. As a documentary researcher and historian, I get to look at a lot of fascinating timelines, but today's explainer, it's easily one of the most incredible historical transformations in the entire Indian subcontinent. We're looking at a near 400-year story of intense persecution, unbelievable resilience, and the birth of a totally unique identity that forever changed the political and spiritual landscape of the region.
Now, we are unpacking a profound historical contradiction today. Think about this for a second. If you look at the origins of Sikhism back in the late 15th century, it was entirely rooted in peace. It was a movement focused on devotion to a formless divine, completely rejecting social hierarchies and emphasizing selfless service. Yet fast forward a few centuries, and the Sikhs had organized into a powerful, modernized state military extending all the way to the Khyber Pass. So how on earth does a community make that monumental leap?
Well, to make sense of this, we're going to trace this evolution chronologically. We'll start with the peaceful foundations, walk through the era of the 10 Gurus, witness the explosive birth of the Khalsa, follow the rise of the Sikh Empire, and finally, look at its fall and the legacy it left behind. Let's kick things off right at the beginning, the absolutely peaceful foundations laid in the 15th century.
The absolute key to understanding Sikh history is grasping this core concept, the Sant Sipahi. It literally translates to the saint soldier. It means perfectly balancing spiritual devotion with physical and martial strength. But, and this is absolutely crucial to remember, the soldier element wasn't there at the very beginning. That part was a direct evolutionary response to severe external threats.
It all starts with the founder, Guru Nanak, back in 1469. He stepped into an India that was rigidly divided by strict social hierarchies and preached a radically different message. He introduced Ik Onkar, the concept of one God, and completely threw out the rigid Hindu caste system. He traveled thousands of kilometers spreading this message, and it spread like wildfire because it was just so universally appealing. He was basically saying, hey, there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, there is only the overarching equality of all mankind.
And you know what the most brilliant physical manifestation of this was? The langar. It's a community kitchen, but back then, it was a totally radical concept. It completely dismantled the caste system by forcing literally everyone, rich, poor, high caste, low caste, to sit down on the floor together in one continuous line and eat as equals. At this stage, the focus was entirely on devotion, honest living, and community service. Warfare wasn't even on the radar.
Moving along our historical timeline, we enter the era of the 10 Gurus. This is where things start to profoundly shift.
When we look at the historical record of these pivotal gurus, you can actually trace the evolution of the faith in real time. Early on, Guru Angad gives the Sikhs their own distinct script. Guru Arjan builds the Golden Temple and compiles the Holy Scripture. But notice the massive shift when we hit the 6th Guru, and then the 10th. Suddenly, the focus goes from compiling texts and building temples to establishing temporal authority and creating an actual military order.
So what happened? Well, this is where our timeline hits a dramatic and, honestly, a very dark turning point. The spiritual growth of the Sikhs crashed headfirst into the brutal reality of Mughal tyranny. After his father was tortured and executed by the Mughal emperor for refusing to convert to Islam, the 6th Guru, Guru Hargobind, realized something had to change. Spiritual purity just wasn't enough to survive anymore. So he introduced Miri-Piri. He literally strapped on 2 swords, one for spiritual authority and one for political and temporal power.
To put it into perspective, the Mughal emperors started seeing this peaceful community as a massive political threat. The executions of the 5th and 9th Gurus weren't just tragedies, they were the absolute direct catalyst for total militarization. The records from 1675 showed that the 9th Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, sacrificed himself to stop the forced conversions happening across the subcontinent. This persistent, horrific persecution made it undeniably clear. The Sikhs had to formalize their capacity to fight back.
This escalating tension brings us to arguably the most critical climax in this entire historical arc, the birth of the Khalsa.
The 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, was just 9 years old when his father was martyred. 9. As a historian looking at his life, it's clear that witnessing such horrific persecution of his people pushed him to a stark realization. He knew that the community needed a permanent, institutionalized martial spirit. If they were going to defend the innocent and survive this empire, they had to transform into an organized, fearless military order.
And the way he did it, it's like something straight out of a movie, but it's documented history. On the festival of Vaisakhi in 1699, he gathered a massive congregation of about 80,000 people.
He suddenly drew his sword and asked for 5 volunteers willing to give him their heads. 5 brave men, from completely different castes and regions, stepped forward. They became the first initiates of the Khalsa, a brotherhood of warrior saints sworn to uphold justice.
Now, to unify this brand new warrior brotherhood, and sisterhood, I should add, he introduced the 5Ks. This was absolute genius from an organizational standpoint. By mandating uncut hair covered by a turban and the kirpan, a sword for defense, he forged a highly distinct physical identity. A Khalsa Sikh could literally never hide from a crowd when injustice was occurring. He also gave all men the surname Singh, meaning lion, and all women Kaur, meaning princess, completely wiping away those old caste identifiers forever.
So, what does this all mean for the faith? If we compare the before and after, it's fascinating. The core tenets, equality, devotion, community, they never changed, not one bit. But the application of them was now firmly backed by the sword. The Khalsa was strictly prohibited from acts of blind violence. They were mandated to practice arms specifically to defend the weak. The idea of the saint soldier was now fully, permanently realized.
Now that the community was militarized, our narrative transitions from basic survival to actively seizing political power.
The mid-18th century was an incredibly dark time in the region. Oppression was at an all-time high, culminating in terrible massacres by Afghan and Mughal forces. But the Sikhs adapted brilliantly. They formed sovereign military bands called missals. These were essentially decentralized, highly effective guerrilla units. They used these hit-and-run tactics to push back invading forces, slowly but surely taking territorial control of the Punjab.
And here's where the map of the subcontinent really starts to change. Capitalizing on a power vacuum, a leader named Maharaja Ranjit Singh stepped up in 1799. He took all these scattered, fierce warrior bands and united them under one central authority. He completely modernized the Sikh military, transforming it from a guerrilla force into one of the most powerful, formidable standing armies in all of Asia.
This is the absolute zenith of their political power. The Sikh empire stretched across Kashmir, Ladakh, right up to the Khyber Pass. But here's the most crucial takeaway from this era. When the Sikhs finally achieved supreme political power, they didn't oppress others. Historical records show the empire was remarkably secular. Maharaja Ranjit Singh integrated Christians, Muslims, and Hindus right into his top administration, truly reflecting that core Sikh belief in universal equality.
However, as with many great empires we study in history, this zenith of political power was destined to be short-lived. Following Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death in 1839, the empire fractured, and it's a tragic collapse, really. During the Anglo-Sikh Wars, the Khalsa army fought incredibly hard against the British, but historical archives explicitly show that the empire was brought down by internal betrayal. Top Sikh generals secretly supplied vital war plans to the British, utterly destroying their own army from the inside out.
And that brings us to 1849. The British officially annexed the Punjab, entirely ending the Sikh Empire. They took the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond, pensioned off the last young ruler, and broke the political sovereignty of the Sikhs. Though, I should add, the British quickly realized the martial genius of the Khalsa and made them a massive part of the Indian Army in the years that followed.
But here's the thing you really have to understand. While the physical, political empire fell, the Khalsa itself didn't. That spiritual and martial mandate to fight injustice, it remained eternally intact. Because their martial tradition was so deeply tied to religious duty and human rights, the concept of the saint soldier survived the fall of the empire, and it continues to define the worldwide Sikh diaspora right up to this very day.
So, as we wrap up this timeline, I want to leave you with a thought. In a modern world that is, frankly, still plagued by inequality and oppression, how can we apply this concept of the saint soldier today? We don't necessarily need to carry a physical sword, right? But cultivating that internal discipline to stand firmly against injustice while keeping a foundation of selfless love for humanity, I think that's an incredibly powerful framework for all of us. Let me know what you think.